Ed Begley Jr., welcome to An Actor Despairs. How are you doing?
Great, Ryan. How you doing today?
I am doing so much better connecting with you. I mean, you are really just such an icon. It's someone I've looked up to for a long time. I mean, what you've carved out in your career, it's amazing because it's almost, with where the business is now, it's almost impossible to imagine a career like that. But I mean, to go from both drama and comedy and kind of bounce back and forth and do it so I mean, just so excellent. It's incredible. And I'm just so excited to have you here. And it means so much for you carving out some time.
You're very kind to say that. I was very lucky. I started a long time ago when things were very different and I think a lot easier. I think it's hard for a young actor starting today. And I'm lucky also. I cheated. I'm the son of Ed Begley, so I had a leg up from the get-go. I didn't know it at the time. I had very little gratitude at that point in my life. I didn't realize how lucky I was that I had won the lottery being born Ed Begley's son. I didn't get that for a while.
Yeah, I mean, your dad was incredible. He won an Academy Award.
Yeah, he won an Oscar for Sweet Bird of Youth with Paul Newman and Geraldine Page. He won a Tony on Broadway with Paul
Wow.
Muni doing Inherit the Wind. So he was a very successful actor himself and was quite lucky himself and quite grateful.
Well, that's amazing. Well, I appreciate your how humble you are, but you're so talented. But before we dig into the work itself, let's start at the very beginning. So, did you grow up in LA or in New York?
A little bit of both. And my dad did Broadway theater, and so that was part of the year. He'd be there for doing a play. Then he did a lot of TV and films in LA. So he had two very modest two-bedroom homes in both places. But what a luxury to, as an actor, having a New York place and an LA place. And so he decided, eeny, meeny, and he decided we would get our grade school education out on Long Island. We lived in Merrick.
Oh, I
And
love
so
Merrick.
Merrick, great little town. Great
Yeah.
for a kid to grow up in the 50s, could you imagine? In the early 60s.
Oh,
It was
wow.
idyllic. And so we had that going for us and easy for him to get in on the Long Island Railroad to get into Manhattan and do a play and then come back to the house. And it was a great way to grow up. I didn't, you know, compared to other people, I thought it was very normal that we'd be hanging out in Broadway theaters and doing stuff like that, hanging out on movie sets. I thought that was all very normal.
Wow. Wait, was your mother in the business?
She was not. She wanted to be in the business. I'd say she was not. That's not fair. She occasionally worked as a background artist and she worked as a magician's assistant, if you can believe that, and lots of
Wow.
stuff.
That's
They
so
were never
cool.
married. It was very cool. I knew her. She was a woman I really just was crazy about. I didn't know who she was. Turned out she was my mother. And so it was all one of those big surprises that one learns at a certain point in your life
Yeah.
who's who. There's a lot of secrets well kept for years by drunken Irish people.
Amazing. And well, talk to me, obviously that's so cool that you had that experience growing up around your dad and on sets and on plays, but I feel like when, you're the son of an artist, it kind of goes one of two ways. You are like, I'm very interested in this community and I want to explore this, or I have no interest in this. For you, when you were like, coming up, did you see yourself becoming an acting, or how did this
Yes,
path
I
you
wanted
did?
it very bad. I wanted to do what my father did. I'm convinced if he had been a plumber, I'd probably be fitting pipe. I think I just wanted to do what he did. I really looked up to him. So, but I had no idea what was involved, Ryan. I thought it was, all limos and sunglasses. I wanted to be an actor, but I wanted more the trappings than the work. I just wanted to get me a series regular part, Dad. I literally thought he could pick up the phone and get me a part on a TV series. I was, very frustrated why he wouldn't do that. I had no idea that A, he didn't have the power to do that, and B, if he had done it, I wouldn't have been very grateful about, the struggle it takes to be an actor.
Totally. I mean, talk to me like when it sounds like the first part of your youth was in America and then the rest was in LA, right?
LA, and indeed, we even came back nearly every summer to Van Nuys, where I grew up, to that home. So we never lost track of. We spent a fair amount of time where I was born. I was born at Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital in
Wow.
1949. So born there, came out every summer, then finally moved back there fully, where I was born in 1963, and for high school and all that. And I've been
You
there
went
ever
to Notre
since.
Dame High School,
I did. I
right?
went to Notre Dame for a few years. I went to Chaminade out in Chatsworth, and I graduated from Van Nuys High.
Wow. And so then at that point, were you, in high school, were you already with an agent? Were you auditioning yet, or was it not till after you finished?
Yeah, I started to, I started going on interviews from a fairly young age, 11 or 12, and I never really thought, wait a minute, how did I get this job interview? Who did this for me? I just kind of, oh, I got an interview. Great. When is it? And
Yeah.
what are the lines? And let me rehearse. But I had I didn't do much rehearsing or preparation. I went on interviews, but I never got anything. Imagine the son of a plumber saying, Dad, you stay home today. I'll take the plumbing truck and I'll go fit some pipe down the block there at the house. And I think I've seen you do it. I think I know what's involved. You have to train, you have to apprentice, you have to learn. And I did none of that. Then finally, when I did train a bit in 1966 and 7, then I
Where
began to get jobs.
where did you train?
I trained with a guy called Paul Kent at the Melrose Theater on Melrose in LA. Then I trained with other people over the years, the Strasberg Institute and Peggy Fury and Stella Adler,
Wow.
lots of good people. Uh, And so I did that for a while and I finally began to work, but I kind of learned on the job, Ryan. I didn't get fired and I don't know why. I didn't know what I was doing, but just kind of got jobs. And I also think I got some of that work literally because I was Ed Begley's son. I did shows like Quincy with Jack Klugman. I'm pretty sure he said, hire Ed's kid for that part. It's a simple little 5-line part. I'm sure he can do it.
Yeah. Wow.
I'd have to read for it, but I'd get it. I think being Ed's son helped in any number of ways.
But you're so talented. I mean, talk to me. Was there a moment of like, you know, imposter syndrome when you first got these early jobs?
Yes,
Like you were aware that you kind of were like, I don't
yes.
know what I'm doing.
But then I had the good fortune to meet Bruno Kirby, a wonderful actor, Bruno Kirby, who was in Godfather 2 and Johnny Brasco and City Slickers. But back then we were both struggling actors doing commercials and we did a Disney movie together. And Bruno decided he changed his name. He was Bruce Kirby Jr., as I was Ed Begley Jr. He changed his name to Bruno Kirby. And he started to really study with Peggy Fury and other good people like that. And so I did the same. I did everything that Bruno did, and I got better. I got a lot better. Then
Wow.
finally, I met a guy. Uh, oh God, that's terrible. I can't remember his name, but he was. Isn't that funny? I'll think of it later. I'll tell the
No
story of
problem.
this guy that helped me a lot later, but I can't think of his name now. And
But
yeah,
but talk to me, at that time, because obviously we've already kind of touched base how different it is now, but this was kind of like pre-cable. So obviously like the studios were booming at this point, right?
they
Like
were.
so you had really the movies that we all long for that they don't really make anymore. Were you sinking, your feet first in television and then working your way up to movies?
Exactly. I began doing My Three Sons. That was the first job that I got. And then I did, like a show called FBI, show called Mannix, uh, Adam 12. And finally, I got a job on this series called Room 222. It was the guy who wrote the pilot was James L. Brooks, who went on to do wonderful movies, of course. And
Wow.
so I got a job on that, not as a regular, but a recurring actor. And I started to be comfortable around the camera because I was there with the same people, the same camera crew, the same cast. David Jolliffe and Bruno Kirby did a guest shot. David Jolliffe was a regular, and Bruno Kirby was a guest actor. Cindy Williams was a guest actor on it. Richard Dreyfuss was a guest actor.
Wow.
So I began to get relaxed in front of the camera, but then unfortunately, I spent the next 20 years, I think, certainly a decade, being relaxed in front of the camera. And that isn't very interesting to watch. Somebody just kind of very relaxed all the time and everything's groovy. There's no conflict, there's no nothing. And
Yeah.
so I then began to, to train with other people. And this one guy said to me, he said, you know what I think is the most interesting thing to watch? How a character deals with pain. And I said, oh, that's a good one. Look, I got to run. I'll see you next week. We'll work some more. I got out to my car. I thought, what a bunch of crap. How a character deals with pain. Who wants to see somebody writhing in pain on a stage in a movie? That doesn't sound very. wait a minute, that's not what he said at all. He didn't say writhing in pain. He said how a character deals with pain. Trying to keep the lid on the pot, trying to
Wow.
keep from showing what sort of pain you had in your past. And Sophie's choice, what happened to Meryl Streep's character, Sophie, in that movie before,
Yeah.
the first part of it. Something happened to her. We don't know what it is, and that kind of work, anything you've seen Joaquin Phoenix do, or Daniel Day-Lewis, or Meryl Streep,
Yeah.
Elizabeth Moss, these wonderful actors. Something's going on there. You can see in the close up, you can see in a wide shot, something happened to this person. What the hell is it? And it's
Inter-
universal for comedy or drama. In dramas, it's quite evident what I just said. But then, even in comedies, you have Harold Lloyd hanging from the hands of a clock, which, would be very frightening and dangerous, and you'd probably die. He's up like several stories. You have Laurel and Hardy carrying a piano, and they fall carrying a piano, and pieces of the piano fall on them down these stairs. That would be very painful. So I realized this guy was right. How a character deals with pain is a universal truth. And I started to incorporate that into my work. And I wasn't just relaxed anymore. I got a lot better.
That's so interesting that you point this out. Like, is this at the point then when you started to kind of, because you're able to bounce back between comedy and drama, which such few actors ever do to any degree of success, but you excel in it. Was this at a certain point when you started kind of exploring both?
Yes. And it
Wow.
was Jack Nicholson who told me, that all you're going to give me, Beggs? He said to me one day on the set of Going South, this movie that he directed and was in, and that he gave me a small part in. And I felt so bad. I was apoplectic actually that I was disappointing this man I so worshiped, a great actor and a great friend. And so I just kind of took that fear I was feeling and didn't fight it anymore. I used it to kind of like jujitsu. I used emotion to kind of defeat the problem I was facing. And finally, I had something going on behind my vacant eyes that was a little bit of life. And so I tried to repeat that again and again and have some. I also got to know Dabney Coleman, a wonderful actor, wonderful dramatic actor, and more popularly, he was a wonderful comic actor and did a lot of comedies. And he was always so real. When he did a comedy, he wasn't doing, oh, no, here come the laughs, folks. It's going to be real funny, this scene. He was always like, it was like he was doing Strindberg or Ibsen or something. He was just in the moment, totally real. And that was very compelling to watch.
Amazing. Were you ever, as your work and started to excel and you started to do different things, did you ever speak to your dad about it and check in like, Dad, how am I doing with the craft?
He passed away long before
Mm,
any of that happened. He died in
mm.
1970, and when he passed away, I had only done like two or three jobs. I was really more a camera assistant than I was an actor. I did some camera work because the acting wasn't picking up at all. I had one job and thought the phone would ring off the hook. It did not, So once I got into SAG, I thought that was it. I'm home free, and it didn't work like that. So I started to work as an assistant cameraman and did mostly that when he passed away. And then that's when I got Room 222 after he passed away, and that's when I began to work fairly regularly.
Wow, amazing. And in the 70s when the business was like, you had Scorsese and all of these directors making these incredible films, were you trying to kind of work with some of these titans early in their careers?
I was trying to get in movies with those people, and I was successful to the extent that I worked with the great Bob Rafelson, who did several movies with Jack Nicholson. I worked with Paul Schrader, and I
Yeah.
worked with some of those wonderful filmmakers from that period. I did Blue Collar with Paul Schrader. I did Cat People, Hardcore, Autofocus.
Amazing.
Very, yeah, I worked a lot with Paul Schrader. He was very generous to me.
Talk to me about this time in your life. Was this really fun to kind of then, be comfortable in your craft, to be working with these masters of their crafts? Like, did it feel, I know hindsight is always 2020, but at the time that you were doing these things, did you have an awareness of how just amazing it was to be in the business at that time?
I did have an awareness of that. Something very special was going on. It was no longer the studios that were in charge. The independent filmmaker became king. And so and the studios couldn't keep up with that change, and so that's why people like, Paul Schrader began to work a lot, and people like Bob Rafelson. He worked with a company called BBS, and that was Bert Schneider, Bob Rafelson, and I can't remember the third guy. Blauner, I think, was his name. But they did movies like Last Picture Show,
Yeah.
and they did documentaries like Hearts and Minds, and they were a very avant-garde producing entity. And so it was, you know, they became more in charge than the studios in many ways. And so the business started to change as the cameras got smaller and the lighting got smaller and the acting became less broad too. The acting wasn't quite as big and, theatrical. You had people like James Dean and you had people like Jack Nicholson. You had, these actors that were doing something different that was very compelling, Bob De Niro came on the scene
Yeah.
and everybody wanted to see that and every actor wanted to do that and be part of that change in filmmaking that was, I think, very necessary.
And speaking of changes in filmmaking, like also changes in television, like St. Elsewhere, that is, one of
Right.
the greats. Like, how did that show come your way? And Denzel Washington as well, right? I mean,
Yes, that was his big break. He had worked before that, but that was his first really good part. Was on that show, and he was wonderful in it. You know, I I auditioned, and this is a theme in my life. I auditioned for the part of Dr. Peter White, a regular on the show, and I didn't get the part. I didn't get it, Ryan. I wanted that part and read for it and read very well, I thought. Didn't get it. They threw me a bone, gave me a part that had just a couple of lines as Dr. Victor Ehrlich character. And the second season, Dr. Peter White threw me the job that I wanted, got shot first in the groin and then in the heart, and he was dead. He was discovered to be the hospital rapist in the story of the show, and he was gone in the second season. My character with two lines was around for the whole 6 years and one of the major parts in the show. So sometimes
wow.
it's a good thing not to get what you want. You get what you need, which is much, much better.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. Talk to me about like being accepting of work because I feel like so many actors, they find success and then they get disillusioned with not it happening in the way that they saw. And for you to like take roles like that, were you, as the 80s continued to boom, were you happy to just be working? For you, was it all what I guess the question would really be like, what attracted you to saying yes and still does?
That's it exactly. I just wanted to be in, be around good people, work on good material. And when I got the script to read for Peter White, the script for St. Elsewhere, I knew right away it was better than any feature film script I'd seen in a long time, if ever. It was television, it was on the smaller screen. And back then there was a kind of a line in the sand, from television to film. If you were a film actor, you just didn't do TV. That was beneath you.
Yeah.
And then that changed. And now, of course, we have big movie stars wanting to do TV shows and not just wanting to do them, they are doing them because they get to see, what the character can do over not just one, 2 hour period, but over a whole season. The whole 13 episodes are nowadays we're streaming, 8 episodes or 10.
Yeah. I
And so everybody wants to be in television.
Amazing. How did the Christopher Guest relationship start for you? Like this is Spinal Tap. Like this is
That started, I knew his sister, Alyssa Guest. She went with a friend of mine, Harry Gittes, and I met her. And then I met Chris Guest in New York. He was doing something for the National Lampoon one day, and I met him with Tony Hendra and got to know him. Then got to know him even better because he had become friendly with Bruno Kirby when they were working on a movie. I think it was called Between the Lines about reporters, and they became close, and I became close with Chris, and I even worked as an assistant cameraman for him on a little thing he was doing. So when they were doing Spinal Tap, they called me in to be the drummer, and that would kind of open the door for me to work with Chris years later on Best in Show. And he's been very generous with me. I've been in every project he's done since then, so I feel very lucky to know him at all, and certainly to work with him.
amazing. Love to hear that. And And in the 90s, as cable kind of became the norm and they started making these all these different shows for not just broadcast, but for these cable networks, was there ever a moment for you where you kind of thought about maybe coming back to New York and doing some theater, or did you always, once you were really going in LA, have you always stayed in LA?
I stayed in LA because I just kept getting good jobs. But then when the opportunity presented itself in the 90s to work with Dave Mamet, I met him at Nelio's, this place on 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. I'm sorry, Nello's, I think. And I met him there with Tom Fontana, a great writer from St. Elsewhere.
Tom's done the podcast.
He did the podcast?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Tom's a friend. Yeah, I love
That's
Tom.
great. He's wonderful.
Yeah.
So he introduced me to Dave Mamet, and Dave, in that very first meeting, said, I have a play I'd like you to look at, and sends me the manuscript for a play called The Cryptogram. And I did it in Boston with Dave Mamet directing, and Felicity Huffman was in it. This kid, Sheldon, just the three of us. And this play that we did in Boston was very successful there. We brought it to New York uh, and did it there off Broadway, but a lovely theater on like 45th Street and 8th Avenue. I can't remember the name of the theater,
Was it
Variety Arts or something.
Signature Theater or I'm not sure.
Not Signature. I can't remember. It's been a few years. That was 1995. My
Wow.
God, that's 30 years ago now. But it was very
Yeah.
successful in New York. I had a great time doing it. Then I got to do it again at the Geffen Playhouse in LA. And then I did a few Dave Mamet plays at the Mark Taper Forum, Romance and November. And I'm just lucky to know a man of his craft. And I still go and see his plays and relish the time I've gotten to work with him.
Amazing. I love that for you. And talk to me, in the 90s, because like I was born in 1990, but I feel like I'm so nostalgic for that time in movie history because they were taking risks and they were making things. So many of these films that we love, what were some of the more exciting projects that you really kind of looking back on now, like really were such, obviously we spoke about Christopher Guest, but like talk to me about some of the things that you love from that time in your life.
In the 90s, the Christopher Guest movies stand out as some of the more important things that I did, and working with Dave Mamet. I'm trying to think about other things that I did in the 90s.
Was
You know,
there
that
anything you passed on that you think still haunts you at all in that time?
now I didn't say no to a lot of work, and that was kind of a problem for me in the 90s. In the 80s, I had tremendous opportunities before me because I'd been on St. Elsewhere for 6 years, and I had gotten cast in three big studio movies I was in. Well, not studio movies. One of them was She Devil with Meryl Streep and Roseanne Barr. I did that movie. Then I did a movie with Stockard Channing called Meet the Applegates. I did a movie with Jeff Goldblum called Transylvania 6 5000. There's a common theme to all those three of those movies that I was in. They were not only critically they were not critically acclaimed at all, and also they were box office failures. They didn't do very well. So the 90s was a period where I was kind of in movie, not kind of very much in movie jail.
Wow.
So I could work in television, but I didn't work in films other than, a movie in Australia with a little girl and a kangaroo, and a movie in Canada with a little girl and a bear. I did one studio movie called Greedy in 1994, but that's really the extent. And I did a week on Batman Forever, but that's a whole decade's worth of studio movies. Other than that, I didn't do really any, you know, big-ish, independent movies either. And then Chris Guest is the one who sprung me from movie jail with Best in Show, and then I started working again in movies, and I've been working ever since.
And this is like, you talk about like movie jail being things didn't do well, but I feel like when you say DVDs really kind of changed that, where like the idea of physical media, a new generation got to discover you because they're like, I watched this thing called Best in Show, and you could pass it around to people.
Yeah, I think that was part of what did it, and just to be associated with good people like Chris and Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara and all the wonderful people in those, Fred Willard, the great people in those movies. I just kept getting a call from Chris to be in the next movie, for your consideration, or Best in Show, A Mighty Wind. I was in A Mighty Wind too, and
Wow.
a series that he did called Mascots. And I've worked for Chris many times since then, and always loved getting that phone call.
Do you feel like Best in Show is what helped you get Arrested Development?
Definitely, definitely. Working with Chris got me Arrested Development, got me 6 Feet Under, and got me Better Call Saul and
T-
Young
t-
Sheldon, all the work that came after.
I mean, those are such big projects. Let's break it down. I mean, talk to me about, Arrested Development, like, and 6 Feet Under, So everyone keeps talking about currently, it's the end of peak TV, but we talk about the shows that built it, and Arrested Development and 6 Feet Under are like the two foremost shows. Like at the time that you got those, and they're obviously couldn't be more diametrically opposed. Was were you aware of what they might become when you read those scripts?
I was aware that, when I did the show, when I did Arrested Development, for instance, I had already, I'd the show had been on for a full season, at least one season, and was a cult, success and cult classic. And then they brought it back for another and another and another and kept, canceling it, then picking it up again. Because Mitch Hurwitz is a total genius. He's just brilliant beyond words. So
Yeah.
it always had a loyal following. And, they done other versions of it, several times now. So that was that. And then what was the other one we were talking about?
6 Feet
Oh, Six
Under.
Feet Under. I
Yeah.
met Alan Ball. I met him with Annette Benning. She's a friend of mine for many years, and I met Alan Ball through her, and I think that's how I got 6 Feet Under, playing Hiram, that hairdresser guy that was a friend of, that was, you know, cheating on, well, she was cheating on her husband with
Yeah.
me, a hairdresser with Frances Conroy. She's such a wonderful actress. I just kind of hung on to her for the duration of the show that I did, and I just had to show up and stand next to her, and everything was going to be fine. She's
What
so talented.
was that amazing working on that show, because it's
It
just like,
was. I knew it was going to be great from the first. I was in the first season of it, and so they had a screening of an episode. I don't even think I was in that episode they screened. No, I was not. I went to some theater on Hollywood Boulevard to see the premiere. I thought, well, this could be interesting. I really liked the script. And then right from the opening credits and the theme song, I went, wait a minute, this is something very, very special. And you
wow,
just became a loyal fan of the show myself. Besides, in addition to being, in it, I was a loyal fan of it for its run, its entire run.
amazing. And with all these projects, Arrested Development, 6 Feet Under, Christopher Guest, Best in Show, do you feel like this allowed like the next generation of comedians like Judd Apatow? I mean, I know he's a little bit older, but like I know you worked with Seth Rogen and Pineapple Express. Like, were these
Right.
guys coming to you, from these projects, being like, we're fans?
Yeah, I got Pineapple Express because I knew Judd from he had worked with Gary Shandling. I did an episode or two of the Gary Shandling show, so I knew Judd because he had worked with those good people with Gary Shandling. And so it's really a small circle of people that are doing all the wonderful creative, not all, but most of the wonderful creative work in LA. And if you get to know that circle of people, it can certainly be to your advantage. It's certainly been
Yeah.
to mine.
Wow, that's amazing. And what, obviously, this is a little bit different from the acting, but talk to me about, because you were in this train before so many others, like how did the whole climate activism thing happen for you? When did you kind of like, obviously I feel like living in LA, people are so much more exposed to it than they are in other parts of America, but when did this kind of become a passion of yours?
It started in 1970 with the first Earth Day, and you just mentioned the reason why I got involved. Being in LA is why I got involved because the smog was so horrible in the 50s and 60s when I was a young boy growing up in the San Fernando Valley. You couldn't see it was a valley. If you were just even a quarter mile away from the hills, you couldn't see them. So it was very, very bad smog for many years, and it hurt your lungs to just sit there and breathe. Certainly, to run, it just seared your lungs. So, and I lived in the valley, as I just said, and people would come from out of town. They go, why do they call it a valley? You couldn't see the hills in any direction. So it
Wow.
just horrible, horrible smog. When I went to the first Earth Day gathering, I said, what are we going to do? There's a wonderful celebration on Earth Day. What about the other 364 days? What's the plan for that? They said, well, we're going to clean up the air and we're going to clean up the water. I went, sign me up because I knew the air was bad from living there for years, for decades, 2 decades total at that point. And I knew the water was polluted, and we had a real challenge there because I'd see the Santa Barbara oil spill. I'd
Yeah.
seen the pollution in LA all the time. Right after it rains, all this horrible pollution would go right out to the Santa Monica Bay and poison the fish and poison all the marine life and poison you if you were foolish enough to swim in it.
Yeah.
So I knew we had to do something to clean up the environment. So I became involved. I started recycling. I became a vegetarian. I started using all biodegradable soaps and detergents. I did everything that I could, turned off the electricity when I didn't need it, even more than I had in the past. And and I did all that stuff, and it was all not only good for the environment, but very cheap. I
Yeah.
saved money doing it. And so I stuck with it and continued to do what I could and just kept moving up the ladder, picking the low-hanging fruit and doing what I could afford. And I even bought my first electric car in 1970, a very primitive vehicle.
Wow.
Yeah, when I say car, I'm being quite grand. It was a golf cart with a windshield wiper and a horn, but
That
it
was
got me around.
rechargeable?
Yeah, yeah, you could plug it in and
Wow.
recharge it. It had just some old golf cart batteries and what have you. But I drove it around the San Fernando Valley. You couldn't really leave the valley much because the hill was too big for it to get over. But
Do you still
got me
have it?
around. No, I wish I did. It's quite a collector's item.
Wow. Didn't you do an episode of Jay Leno's show with
Yeah, with a more current electric car, not that
got
one.
it.
Yeah,
Got it. Amazing. And I mean, I'm so grateful for you being dedicated to that. You also did like a sustainable show for a little bit, didn't you?
I did with my wife Rochelle Carson. My wife and I did a show called Living with Ed about what a picnic it is living with me with all my energy efficiency stuff that drives her crazy. It was kind of a funny look at living with an environmental activist. It was pretty good.
Wow. That's so cool. I mean, anything you would any ways that you sites or things I can kind of plug for the audience listening now that you suggest they check out, whether charities you're directly involved with or things that people can support?
Yeah, get involved with, somebody like a local group here in LA. We have a group called Tree People that's a great organization. Bette Midler's doing wonderful stuff with the parks in Manhattan. She's been cleaning up Manhattan to a large extent for many years. Bette Midler's doing wonderful work, in New York. And national groups like NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, they're doing great work, nationwide and worldwide. So align yourself with a group that's doing that kind of stuff. The Climate Reality Project, Al Gore's group is a wonderful group. I support them, and do what you can and start doing something today because we got a lot of work to do here.
Yeah, it seems like more than ever. And oh, thank you for sharing. And I almost like want to apologize because I could just go down your resume like this. It's so impressive. So I apologize to you and to the guests listening, but to kind of to not literally take your entire life story and try to consolidate it here. Talk to me in the 2010s, we had that strike and I think it was like what 2008 and it was kind of the beginning of this whole new media, where
Right,
essentially like the early beginnings of streaming started to happen. And for
right.
you, whether with your agent or with your own intuition, did you start to kind of choose projects a little bit differently than you were perhaps in the early 2000s?
Yeah,
Like,
I think it affected everybody, and I certainly tried to adjust to the change in the industry when it started to go more towards streaming and less
mm,
towards, physical things like a DVD and back in the day, a VHS tape.
yeah,
Things really changed. Even when I was quite young, there was no VHS tapes, of course. We had like 16 millimeter film for documentaries and 35 millimeter film for big TV shows and movies. And it was a physical entity, the recording, and very different. The equipment was large, the lights were large and bright and sucked up a lot of power and would heat up the set. Everybody would be sweating, because of the amount of light you had to throw onto a set to get an f4 on the lens. So
yeah,
it was a different era, and the cameras got smaller, the lights got smaller, and the performances got smaller in a good way. Everybody wasn't acting up a storm and chewing the scenery, you know, whenever they thought it warranted it, which was probably a lot less of the time. But
to-
think about it. I knew when I was quite young met through my father one of the Keystone Cops. They were silent film stars called the Keystone Cops. They were big in silent films. I knew one of those actors from that. I also know Sean Baker, who did a wonderful film.
You know Sean
Uh,
Baker? Oh my
yeah,
God.
he
I
did a
love
film
Sean.
on his iPhone, for God's sake. Years
Tangerine.
early. Exactly, brilliant
Love it.
movie. And he did that on his iPhone. So from the Keystone Cops and cameras as big as my desk here, we've gone to, people doing a film and a good one on their little handheld device. So things have changed a great deal from
Yeah.
1969, 67 when I started acting, 1949 when I was born and hanging out on the set with my father. I've seen tremendous changes in those many years, 75 years now. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh, thank you for sharing. And, obviously in the 2010s, you before in the early 2000s, you did 6 Feet Under, but Breaking Bad became such a big one. Did it obviously Better Call Saul happen for you? How, I know you and Michael McKean have worked together a lot. How did Better Call Saul come together for you?
I was a big fan of Breaking Bad, of course. You know, my friend Bryan Cranston was in the show and just brilliant in it, of course. I
Yeah.
just loved the show, and I hadn't known Vince Gilligan before that, and I just fell in love with his work as a writer and a producer and a director. So I got a call to audition for him for a character on the new show Better Call Saul that he was doing, and it was a character of his Jimmy's brother. And
Oh,
I
oh, you
knew that
auditioned
Mike,
for that one
I
originally.
auditioned for that too, and I did
Wow.
very well. And I auditioned, and uh, Vince said to me, he said, "You give me a real problem, Ed. You did such good work. There's a friend of mine, and I know he's a friend of yours, Michael McKean. But years ago, when I worked with him on X Files, I went, I'm going to write a show for you, so I want to keep my promise and give him this part, which he was wonderful auditioning, but you did a wonderful, wonderful job. So when I left the audition, I said to the casting director or somebody, I said, "May the best man win."
Oh man.
So I learned that I didn't get the part. I called Michael McKean. I said I made one mistake when I auditioned for this part. He said, "What's that?" I said, "When I left the audition, I said, may the best man win." And God damn it, he did, you bastard.
Oh
He was
man.
so he was so good in that part. What I did
Yeah.
in the audition was good, but nothing remotely as good as that. He's such a great actor, such a great friend. I just
Amazing.
and look what he's doing on Broadway now in Mammoth's Play.
Have you
He's done
seen it
very good.
yet?
No, I got to see it. I hear he's brilliant in it. I'm going to see it before the cast changes or
Yeah,
whatever happens.
I'm here in New York. Let's go. Let me know if you come to town.
I definitely will.
Um,
Yeah,
wi-
he's. If I could be as good as Michael McKean one day, I'll be a very happy actor.
yeah, but so then how did Gilligan keep the line of communication open and kind of been like, well, there's going to be other characters?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said. He said to Vince Gilligan said to me, I'm going to write another part that I hope you want to do, and I'll let you know when we've got it going. And thanks so much, Ed. It was a pleasure to talk to you. There's that has happened to me many times over the years where a director and writer said, I'm going to write another part for you. And it has come to fruition 0% of the time. That's a surefire way to never hear from them ever again.
Oh man.
Except with this one brilliant man who's the bigger they are, the nicer they are. And
Wow.
that's Vince Gilligan. I get a call from the agent within like a relatively short period of time. There's a part of Cliff Maine and they'd like you to be in the show. I couldn't believe it. There's
Um,
nobody better than Vince Gilligan. He's the best writer and the best human being you've ever met.
he's amazing, and I'm from Richmond, Virginia originally, so I got to give him an extra Richmond shout out. But
Of course.
I love that that happened for you, and you're so great in that show. I mean, how was it working with Bob Odenkirk in those scenes? Like, did you know Bob already?
I did know Bob, but I was a fan instantly. He's so great in Better Call Saul, and he was great in Breaking Bad and great on Broadway, I'm told. I got to see him in that play. I love
Yeah.
that play.
It's
It's a
all
great
roads of
play.
your life are really in that production right now.
Exactly. It's
That's a,
fantastic. I can't wait to see it.
and tonally, talk to me about doing a show like, I think you were probably doing Better Call Saul and Young Sheldon at the same time, weren't you?
I was doing those at the same time. Yeah, and Steve Millar is a good friend of mine. He's got another show on that's on you know, on CBS right now, with some of the cast members of
Wow.
Young Sheldon. It's a lovely, lovely show.
Yeah.
I just love. and of course, uh, what is it? Big Bang Theory was a wonderful show that kind of, you know, Young
Exploded.
Sheldon. Yeah, exactly. That would Young Sheldon is the prequel to what do you call it?
The prequel to Big Bang.
Big Bang,
Yeah,
exactly. Both
yeah.
fine shows. Steve Millar worked on both those shows, of course, as the showrunner and a great writer and a great friend.
Amazing. And obviously, at this point, the strikes happened, and we're here today to talk about Don't Tell Larry. When you kind of came out of that, did that happen pre-strike or post-strike, this project?
That happened pre-strike. Yeah,
It
that was
did.
just before the strike. Yeah, we did that a few years ago in Fort Worth.
So when is this coming out?
It's coming out June 20th. It'll be streaming on Amazon, also on some other platforms. It'll be live in theaters at the Lemley Town Center in Encino, and it's a wonderful film. You got to see it. It's hysterically funny. These guys, John and Greg, are great writers, great
Amazing.
cast. It's just amazing. I'm proud to be in this movie. It's so funny and so dark, and that's a wonderful combo if you can pull it off.
I love that. And talk to me, Ed. I mean, I feel like you have done it all. Like what is exciting you now? Like what do you want to do? What are you most interested in?
Right now, I'm like most people interested in just getting the business going again. It's been kind of slow, not kind of slow, extremely slow lately. I last worked in January and it's been cricket since then. So hopefully things will
Yeah,
pick up and hopefully in town, there's a lot of filming out of town these days and that's unfortunate for all the crew and what have you, the people that, rely on TV and films to make a living.
yeah.
So I'm hoping that there's some work either here or somewhere because it's been very different since,
I
you
know.
know, last year.
But it's crazy. The business has changed so much, and it does feel like it's become globalized in so many ways. And, I have asked every guest that has ever done my podcast this, and I, apologize because it's not an easy question, but for the actors now, it's a very confusing time. We kind of spoke earlier about how before, even 10 years ago, there was this kind of, dichotomy of television and movies. And, now you have movie stars doing television shows, and the only movies they really make anymore are superhero movies or, small independent films. So I feel like the actors starting now, whether graduating drama school or, finding their love of it, are frustrated. So for the actors listening, any words of wisdom you might have?
Yeah, if there's not a lot of acting work in TV or films, which there is not now, get out there and do a play somewhere, get back to the important work and start to take classes again. Actors act and make sure you keep your instrument honed, do something, scene classes, just put on a play with some friends, just do something to keep your instrument tuned. That's very important. So if there's not a lot of work professionally, get involved with a theater company, do something, but don't lose sight of what's important, which is the work.
Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything that you wish, if you could have told yourself when you were starting out that you wish you maybe knew a little bit sooner?
Yes, if I could have told my young self to really focus on the work and not focus on the trappings, I think I would have done a lot better. I discovered that later in life. I wanted to be a series regular and I wanted to live in a fancy house and I had it all backwards. What's important is the work. So I urge people again to see this wonderful movie, Don't Tell Larry. It'll be in theaters on June 20th in some Lumley theaters, specifically the Town Center there in Encino. And it'll also be on Amazon and Apple. Don't Tell Larry, a wonderfully dark and brilliant comedy by John Shimke and Greg Porper. And please go see that movie. I love it. I love the cast of it. I love, the way it
Ama-
turned out. It's hysterically funny and quite dramatic too. There's some twists and turns that are extraordinary.
Amazing. I will have it linked here. Ed Begley Jr., I cannot thank you from the bottom of my heart. Like, this was amazing. I so appreciate your time. I could talk to you literally all day. And I mean this with every word of sincerity. Please come back sometime. Let's do this again. Fill in all
I'll
the
do it
gaps that I
again.
didn't get to cover.
Let's do that for sure, pal. Thank you
Okay,
so much,
cool.
Ryan.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I really hope we get a chance to work together someday. And thank you for your service. You're incredible, and I just have so much appreciation for what you do. And I think I speak on behalf of all actors where you're really to us, you're a hero. So thank you.
You made my day, pal. Thanks so much, Ryan.
All right.